So welcome to episode 5 of season 7 of Third Song In. We've had some really great guests on our show, and today we have me.
This is Third Song In with Chris Derickson and Tom Polacek.
This is going to be a departure for us. It falls under the category what I've referred to in our outlines as making the sausage. I don't know if that's exactly right because to me, making the sausage has more to do with making the podcast. But we've decided to interview each other for individual episodes. And we drew straws, and Chris got the short straw, so he has to be interviewed first. Because you're a fucking wild card, man. There's no telling what you're going to say if you're in the fucking spotlight like this.
Yep. Yeah, and this, I think in some ways it falls under the making the sausage because it's it's one of the inspirations for the podcast was to almost create a time capsule for our kids and friends, if they're still alive after we are.
Or if they're still our friends after
this. just capture where we are now, where we were back in the school days and everywhere in between. The playlist and all that stuff are just bonus for us. But this is gonna be weird.
It's already weird.
Nervous.
I agree with you. And I tried to come up. So originally I thought I would just ask you questions about your concept of the podcast and your inspiration for doing it, because as is kind of well established, if you've listened to any of our prior episodes, it was basically your idea. Well, not basically, it was your idea. And I do think I want to talk a little bit about that, and that's why the making the sausage aspect of things occurred to me, or that we could slot it into that and call it as part of the title of the episode. But then I also thought, for listeners, first of all, they've heard a lot of this already, how we got to where we were in terms of deciding to put stuff out on the internet. But I actually have some questions. As long as I've known you and as good of friends as we are, I have some questions about certain periods of your life, particularly those where we weren't living in the same state or even the same region. And frankly, I think that's where I want to focus my questions. Behind the curtain a little bit, we talked about this in advance of these episodes and decided not to tell each other the questions we were going to ask ahead of time, which means not only the specific questions, but again, the category or the nature of the questions. So, as far as I'm concerned, you may focus on something completely different. I want to start with basically the end of your time at Washington University, which wasn't the end of your time in St. Louis, and wasn't actually anywhere close to the time where we were friends and for that matter, roommates for a big period of that time. But what I thought about when I looked back at that time, which would have been roughly 87, 88, I graduated from Washington University in 1988. You were in my class. I was in your class going into school, and you were unable to graduate in 1988. From my perspective, I won't say you disappeared, but you weren't around. And I can't remember if it started in the fall of 87 or the spring of 88 when you moved out of the house, if I'm not mistaken. Well, you know what? I'm not even going to try to describe it because your memory will be much better than me. But tell me what happened that kept you from graduating from WashU. Because as of the end of your junior year, as far as I knew, you and I were on kind of the same path. We were both history majors and we're on target to graduate.
Yep. So I may have told this story before, but this exemplifies why I didn't graduate. So there was one of my classes, I think it was junior year, where I hardly ever went to class, heard from friends in the class that midterm was coming up, crammed for it, went and took it, heard that it was being handed back, sitting at my desk and nervous, and teacher walks by and says, "I'd hate to see what you'd do if you ever attended class." And he put my blue book down, and I flipped it over and I got a 97. So I got the highest grade in the class.
And
so,
that was junior year.
Yeah, that was junior year. So I was still I've been very clear. I was I was increasingly a fuck up. Like I just had horrible study habits, but I was smart enough to make my way through if I tried. And then that same class, end of the semester, it was a take home, and I busted my ass to finish the final, and I did it with several friends. I mean, I did my own work, but I know that it was, good work. I'm walking back to turn it in, and one of our fraternity buddies said, "Hey, we're doing a big euchre tournament. Do you want to go play cards?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I followed him back to the house, and I never turned in my final. Like it's just the stupidest fucking decisions in the world. So
So let me
I
ask
had
you.
every intention of, turning it in after we played cards that night, but then I didn't by the next day, and I probably still could have turned it in. So I passed that class, but with a poor grade, and I think it just went downhill from there. I think the other problem is my parents were getting divorced at the time, and like I had a good sized scholarship or financial aid, whatever you want to call it, but I would not have been able to afford to come back senior year. But I didn't want to go home. And I thought that if I started working, maybe I could pay my own way to finish school, which never happened in St. Louis.
So I, in my head, I thought that there was financial aid paperwork or some kind of applications that needed to be turned in that you didn't get in on time. And I think I thought that because that's what you said when you didn't come back. So you didn't come back fall semester senior year. Is that accurate?
I didn't take any classes senior year. I was there thinking that I would work, and then let's veer off a little bit. That was when my first wife started enrolling. It's fall of '87. I met her. I was
Mm-hmm.
still hanging around. That was, I think, what kept me from just going home. I mean, probably
Okay.
other reasons, but that was a big factor. And then, I mean, I'll be truthful, there's also a reason that I started turning things around,
Right, right.
eventually becoming. So I hung around, worked in the bar world for a couple years, making probably pretty decent money, but I wasn't making enough to go back to WashU. You and me and first Doug, and then later Joe Pay, shared apartments and places close to WashU. And then at one point, I don't remember what you all were doing, but my future first wife graduated early, was going back to New Jersey. So I followed her back to New Jersey. Maybe that's the summer I came back and helped our previous boss open up a new bar down in a different place.
All right, so you're jumping way, way too fast. I have questions way before that.
All right.
I do want to ask about that, but so when in between junior and senior year, did you make a conscious decision that you were not going back to school, or did it just kind of happen because paperwork didn't get done, or because you just kind of, were distracted from the stuff that, the nuts and bolts of stuff that had to be done?
I think I was delusional as to my ability to do it on my own.
Because you stayed in St. Louis that summer, correct?
Yeah.
And where did you live then in between? Were you living in the house in the summer between junior and senior year? Because I feel like,
I think I must have.
yeah, I think so too, because I feel like it was a surprise to me. I didn't know you weren't going to finish there. And I didn't find out until kind of into the first semester of senior year. It was like, oh, yeah, something blew up. And that's when you kind of fell off the radar a little bit.
And I think I was embarrassed about, I mean, I'm not a dumb person.
Mm.
And I think I just kept, I mean, not totally dumb, but um, I think I just kept trying to fool myself. I mean, I don't know how much they followed it back then. I now know. I mean, you have to continue to make satisfactory academic progress the bar is not all that high for some federal money, but I think I had scholarships, and
Uh,
I'm guessing that I was losing scholarships. So it was in addition to my parents not being in a position to support me at the time, I was hurting myself. So, I mean, I think I just sort of, was too embarrassed to talk about what was really going on and figured I could just, I think it was it junior year that we got the gig down at Spaghetti Factory and started.
I feel
figuring
like it
out.
was right. It was in that period of time because I think we got a job because a friend of ours had a job, and he got the
Yeah.
job because another fraternity brother got him the job. Because we started out, it was you and Dave Plurad and myself that started working on the landing at Spaghetti Factory as bartenders, and we took that gig because they trained you there. So you got training on how to be a bartender and how to make mix drinks, and so we all started there and lasted for a bit, but then you and I ended up anyway working for a different ownership group, which owned a couple of bars in and around St. Louis and Clayton, Missouri.
Yep.
So after you left the house, is that when you moved into U City in that little place on Syracuse that Joe and I ended up moving in with you?
Yeah, I think so. It wasn't overly expensive, but it was nice to get roommates afterwards, or after I'd already moved in. And because I think I was in there by myself for a little while because I had to leave the space for a little while because they totally redid the floors and
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know.
Yeah, that was before me because
Yeah,
I think I moved in after graduation, and you and I had rooms like just
yeah,
regular single rooms in an apartment, and our friend Doug lived in the sunroom, and paid much less rent because it was a fucking sunroom, and in the winter it was like 30 degrees in there. And I'm sure we could do some stories or tell some tales about when the three of us were roommates, but the three of us as a group didn't last that long. But then Joe moved in with us, and he moved into that sunroom, and we kind of stayed roommates for a while.
yeah. And I mean, we've at least talked. Chopin talked about the banging of his razor. I mean,
Yes, who ducks? Yes, that
he
was
probably should have paid extra just for that. So.
we. I think we all kind of we rubbed each other the wrong way. I think as roommates because he's a good guy, but it just
He is. I
didn't seem to
really
work
liked it.
out.
I really liked him, but that was one of the first times where I'm like, I can like somebody and hate living with them.
All right, so now to fast forward a little bit,
All
you've
right.
mentioned that you ended moving to Jersey, followed your girlfriend at the time, maybe even fiance at that time. I know she was going to medical school. Where did you end up, and how did you end up there?
So, yeah, she was going to med school. We were outside of Camden, fairly far outside. We're in the suburbs. She went to the School of Osteopathic Medicine. I forget the exactly where it's located, but it was out in that area. So I went to Rutgers Camden, and because I wasn't in school for a couple years, they wanted to. So this is the timing that makes sense now. They wanted to see more recent work. So I went out to St. Louis, helped Lou open up a new bar, and then I think I took 4 or 5 classes that summer at St. Louis Community College.
Oh, okay,
And so I got all A's. They weren't difficult classes. Went back to Rutgers, got in, and then I accelerated. I was a full-time student, and then I worked a job at night doing the worst thing in the world. I did collections for J.C. Penney, collecting
really?
on the yeah, collecting on the Fashion Bug credit card, which was the worst because you would be calling all these young kids who
Oh
were as
God.
dumb as I was back in the day, being like, "Oh, I don't have," it was terrible.
Oh
But
my gosh, I didn't know about that gig.
yeah, it paid the bills. So full-time student, finished up in, I think it was 2 years. I mean, this
Let,
doesn't matter, but it
Actually, it does though.
highlights
Place that
go
in
ahead.
terms of the year. So would that was after 92, right? It was after I
Yep.
graduated law school because that's when the three of us as roommates kind of went our separate ways.
Yeah, so I
So,
graduated in 94,
okay.
and then I got my master's in 97. So those are the 2 years or the two milestones that I remember. So went back, I guess it was 2 years, and I probably was taking 4 classes a semester. There was 1 or 2 that I took 5, but it was the beginning of my turning things back around to who I was because I working full time, school full time. In my entire time there, I got 1 B+, and I remember sitting on the train into Camden, and my professor came in for my senior thesis class, and he turned around and he's like, "Hey, you did great on the final paper." I'm like, "Awesome." He's like, "Yep, got the highest grade in the class. You got a B plus." And I'm like, "Motherfucker!" I was like,
You
and he
suck.
looked at me, and he looked at me. He's like, "You look disappointed." I was like, "Well, I'd gotten all A's." He's like, "I don't give out A's." He said, and I think he goes, "In the end, you'll remember this class more than any of the other classes." He goes, "Because you had to work for this." And I'm like, "That's a good point." So
Yeah,
he was
fuck
a good
off.
guy. And yeah. At the time, I didn't see it, but in hindsight, I mean, it was a good experience because I don't know, I you start to not feel like yourself when you have to, you know, embarrassed about things, not as straightforward, even with close friends like you. So it was nice to start feeling like I was on the path to who I was before. And I know I will take some credit for that, but I will also say that my first wife was very influential. I mean, she's smart, and went to med school, and I'm like, she's going to med school. I'm going to undergrad. I got to
Yeah.
finish this stuff.
And so
And
how long did it take you to finish up the undergrad? If the,
I think it was 2 years. So I
okay.
took the summer, and then 2 years in Camden. And then we got to a point where I was done with school. She was done with med school. Well, I guess she wasn't done with med school. I applied to graduate programs and got into American University in DC and decided to move down there. So for at least a year, we were living in different states.
Oh, okay.
So I moved down to DC in the tiniest apartment in the history of apartments. Um, and she stayed up in New Jersey, finished med school, and then she started looking for internships and found one down in DC.
Oh.
So then we were in that smallest apartment in the history of apartments for a year, and then we moved out to the suburbs, and it was really cool. Like DC's got a bad rap at times, but some of the things like to be able to walk over to the Library of Congress and all the stuff on the hill and the mall, and there was there's a really cool outdoor market on 8th Street that I would walk up to on weekends. So it was, I don't love city living, but I enjoyed that for you know, the couple years that we were there. And then
Yeah, you're the
was
right age, right, to be
right.
living in the city and around that stuff.
Yeah.
So, what was the graduate program that you entered at American University? What were you studying?
So I was studying, this is kind of this will take you into the next phase if you want to go there. I applied to a history program. I mean, I majored in history at Rutgers Camden, applied to a PhD program in history at American, was accepted. I guess I was accepted to the master's program, and that
Right.
because PhD you get funding. So part of my financial aid, not academic, was a work study job, and I happened upon the registrar's office at American, and there were two other graduate students. So I didn't necessarily want to work with undergrads per se. I mean, it was a good setting, and the assistant registrar at the time really gave a lot of responsibility to the graduate students who worked in the office. So I started working there very quickly. I was like in the first week, I was like, I don't know if I can do, you know, full-time studies, part-time job, and then travel back and forth between DC and New Jersey. So I went to the assistant registrar and I said, "Hey, I need to get a full time job. So I'm going to be looking for a full time job." I came back the next day, and he had created a job in the office for me. One of his other folks was going to be leaving, so he basically created a full time job for me. So I started working in the registrar's office full time, taking part time for classes. So the beauty of that is American has one of the most generous employee benefits for taking classes. You can take two classes free every semester, including the summer.
Oh, wow.
So it's stretched out my studies, but full time was three for graduate students. So if you go full time for fall and spring, it's six. If you go part time, taking two classes, fall, spring, summer, it's also six. So it extended me by a little bit, but not much. And it
And
was all free.
yeah,
So
the free part seems really key at that point.
yeah, and then
And
oh, go ahead.
yeah, so my question is so you went into to study history at the graduate level, at the master's level. What
Yep.
was did you have a career goal in mind at that time?
Yes, I wanted to teach, and that was dispelled pretty quickly. So the first, so I enjoyed the research. Some of my favorite memories from American were research trips. At the time, I was studying, when I first started, I figured I had to be like, serious. I was looking for more serious topics. So I was looking at the relationship between some of the Catholic Church labor groups back in the 50s and earlier. So
Hmm,
the relationship between the Catholic Church and labor. The Catholic Church is notoriously conservative. So what I ended up finding out was it was very fringe groups of the Catholic Church that were pro-labor, and I started focusing a little bit more on some of the anti-labor stuff. So I took a trip up to New York City, went to, I think it was Fordham is I think it's a Catholic school, but they had a
right.
great archive there of some of this labor stuff. And I wrote it, and I remember sitting down with my advisor, and he's like, "This is really good stuff." He goes, "But it doesn't feel like you're really into it." And we started asking questions of what I was more into. And so I went back and started thinking about it. And I mean, music has always been my thing. So I went back to him and I'm like, I know it's going to sound dumb. I said, but I love music. I said, I'm sure that's not serious enough. And he's like, no, he goes to see what you can do. So I dove into the history of country music,
And
looking a little bit.
this was
Go
part
ahead.
of the master's
Yep.
studies. Okay,
Yep.
I wasn't sure how early. I knew when you started to work on your PhD that you were in that field, but I didn't know when it happened. I didn't know if it was
Yep.
part of the started with the PhD or started beforehand.
It started in the MA, and I'll have a couple stories about going into the PhD side of things. So, one of the coolest classes I've ever taken, and I really like telling the story, was with Bernice Johnson Regan. She was part of the SNCC,
Oh,
Freedom Singers, so very active in the civil rights movement. And she was also in
on the Rock.
Sweet Honey in the Rock. Yeah.
I think
I don't
that's what
know.
it's called.
Yeah. I saw them perform at least once. But the first class I took with her was about the traditions of African American music. So it was cool that I had, that background, the opportunity to to study under someone like that. Go into the first class, I was a little bit older. There were some even much older students in the PhD program. So just by looking around the table, you couldn't necessarily tell who was who. So we're all sitting there, and this person sits down next to me, and I, said hi, and sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden, this booming voice starts singing an old slave song, and I about jumped out of my seat because I'm not expecting someone to be singing. And I mean, that was Bernice Johnson Regan. That's how she started the class.
Wow.
It was one of the best classes I've ever taken. But the paper I wrote for it was and I sat down with her to review my topic, and I said, what I'd like to do is talk about why, you know, country music isn't necessarily popular with African Americans. She's like, well, that's interesting. She goes, but you're trying to prove a negative. Why don't you first start with why it's so popular with white people? And I was like, oh, that's probably a good idea. But it seemed too obvious. But it drove me down to, first looking at the traditions of country music, and then I've always been interested in the fringes. So
Right.
Chris Christopherson, and that sort of outlaw movement, what I would argue is the more intellectual approach to country that in a lot of ways weren't loved at the time, but had significant influence on country music culture is what I ended up focusing on. But in between there, I mean, it was eye-opening some of the racist stuff you would find
Yeah.
in these archives. And there was this guy, he wouldn't share it with me. And I don't remember if I talked to you about this. I went down this path of trying to research these incredibly racist recordings. I'm going to forget the name of the artist. I'll find it. It can be a post facto. But the rumor was that it was a famous country music artist singing under a pseudonym, and there were
Really?
these horribly racist songs. And at the time, they were largely purchased like at truck stops. Like they weren't sold by major labels. They were the classic underground type of music. And I was trying to dig into it and find a little bit more about it. Of course, it was underground. I remember reading a journal, and there was a woman who ended up writing this really great book later who said that she was researching and she couldn't find anything. And I was like, shit. So I,
Wow, though, that's crazy.
yeah, so I went in a different direction. When I went to the Country Music Hall of Fame for one of my research trips, which is another great memory, I was talking to the archivist there, and I just happened to mention these. I'd long since stopped worrying about him. And he's like, I have a lot of those recordings and I know exactly who sang those. So
Get out of here.
he wouldn't
He
tell me.
wouldn't
He
tell
said
you?
it. No, he wasn't being a dick about it. He was just,
Right.
it was, so that tells me it was
It
somebody
was
pretty,
Charlie
pretty
Pride,
freaking.
which big
So,
surprise to everybody.
so that sort of stuff was fun for me,
Yeah.
and but also it was well received. So I finished my master's. I officially applied to join the PhD program and to be funded. And this is
Let me
gonna,
stop you for a second
yeah, go ahead.
because I'm curious whether when you started your master's, the plan was to get your PhD.
It was because I wanted to teach, and you
And you
needed,
wanted to teach at the college level, I
yeah,
assume.
yeah, yeah. I did
Okay.
not want to teach it. I was thinking, idealistically, I didn't still really know what I wanted to do with my life. We sort of have two parallel things going on. I'll try to connect them at some point. So I applied to the PhD program. I was accepted. I was not offered funding. This is the funny part. I ran into my advisor, who's remained a friend to this day, in the bathroom, and we were chatting, and he's like, I was so pissed off. He's like, you should have been funded. He said, but the discussion was he's already figured out a way to pay for his
Oh,
program because he works at the university. So we'll give the money to somebody else. So I'm not saying that I deserved anything. I just was like, well, that's bullshit.
yeah.
But
It would have been
I,
nice to have a little extra cash.
yeah, yeah. So I continued to work and then continued to do my PhD program. I finished all the coursework and had started down the path of doing my dissertation, finished all my comprehensive exams and all that other stuff. It was just a question of that. Then I got to a point where I had to decide about moving and decided to move down to North Carolina. I can get there in a few minutes, but I had chosen then a path to work in the registrar's office because I started as a work study. I got offered this temporary full-time job, and then a fairly cool job opened up programming the degree audit system for the undergraduate programs.
It's still
I
at
did that
American. This is
still at
also American.
American.
Okay.
So I decided to take that, really enjoyed it, got to work with the vendor. I actually, again, I'm not saying this to brag. I came up with some ideas for them. They adopted them into the product. It was just sort of it was a very rewarding experience. And I sort of made a name for myself on campus. And then this position opened up in the School of International Service at American still as an advisor. I got a call from the dean who asked me to apply for it. So it wasn't where I thought I would be going, but I ended up taking it because I was actually making a little bit more money. So my first job in American, that job I told you about, I was making $17,500. I remember that specifically. I got a big ass raise to be an advisor, making $22,000. I couldn't pass that big bonus up. So I worked there for a couple years, established myself a little bit further. The director of admissions for the college opened up, and again, the dean asked me if I would be interested. I'm like, I hadn't wanted to do that. So point is, I bounced around a little bit, but what that ended up doing for me is making me very valuable, I think, for future jobs in higher ed, because not a lot of people have had that broad spectrum of
Right.
experience.
So
So,
as you
oh,
were
good.
bouncing around,
Yep,
I take it that the move that involved the $5,000 bounce or bump in pay was
yep,
made primarily as a financial
yep,
decision, which makes sense at that age and with that, I mean, that's a huge increase. That's a what 20%
yeah,
increase.
right.
Uh, as you began to change jobs or move around, did it occur to you that you were moving towards a job in the administrative side of higher ed as opposed to something else?
Teaching. Yes, so I didn't complete the circle. I will right now. So when I entered the PhD program, part of it is TAing for classes. So I TA'd for 2 classes, and then I actually stopped because I wasn't required to because I wasn't being funded.
Yeah.
As part of it is you get paid. So I did an introductory class, and the assignment was once a week they had to just write a reflective essay. It wasn't super long. So I would grade all of these and I took it real serious. I'm reading them, I'm providing them feedback. I remember one student, I don't know how they messaged me. I'm sure we had email at the time, but the feedback I got from so many, first off, the writing level for some of these students was horrendous. I was like, oh my God, how did these kids get into college? Secondly, I would give thoughtful, detailed feedback on their writing and their thinking too. But a lot of it was their writing. Like these are smart kids. They just couldn't figure out how to communicate.
Mm.
And I got so much feedback. Why are you criticizing my writing? This is a history class, not an English class. I'm like, you guys are idiots. So, but that, but that sort of, and I guess I could have taken the next level of maybe I can inspire these kids to want to learn. But what I took away is these kids don't want to learn. I don't think I want to teach. I just did not feel the
I just
drive.
I just picture you in red ink on that paper, just writing, "You're an idiot," handing it back
So
to
uh,
him.
the next class I taught was not taught, TA was senior seminar. So it was much more rewarding. But at that point, I was really starting to feel the pull towards administration. Like what I told you about the degree audit stuff, the rewarding aspects of it were what I was feeling on the administrative side and not on, stuff like there were certainly other factors for this, but I went into admissions, which is not something I ever thought I'd want to do. And I looked at the recruiting plan from my predecessor, and I started doing stuff like, all right, they're traveling to this college and this college. Let's see how many applicants we get from those programs. So a lot of the places they went were really fun to go to, but we're getting like 0 or 1 application. I'm like, we're not getting any bang for our buck out of that. So we did stuff like we had never gone to Texas, and like no one's going to go to Texas. I'm like, well, you know what? They have a school of international studies down in that area. I think it was UT Austin. So we went to UT Austin, recruited in that first year. We got like 20 or 25 applications from
Really?
Texas, and so just sort of putting together logical thinking and how you do it. I would go to. We were part of an international studies organization, and we would travel the country to these recruiting fairs with other international studies programs. I hated all the people in admissions. I just hated them. And like they'd have stuff like they were glorified salespeople. I remember this kid came up to me and said, "Oh, you're at American University. Tell me why I should go here." And I said, "I'm not going to do that. You tell me why you should go here." I said, graduate schools are a really important decision. You should know what you're getting into. What do you know about American University? It's like, well, I don't know anything. And I'm like, I'd suggest you go look up, do a little
Yeah.
research and come back and ask me questions. And the person next to me is like, that's not very nice. I'm like, that's what it should be. Like,
Right.
I don't want to sell some kid on going someplace and then he goes there and he's miserable. I
Right, because
said,
he
this,
didn't know what he was getting into in the first
right.
place.
I said, these are a lot closer to adults than these, the undergrads. I'm not going to recruit them unless they know what they're, so they didn't like me. I didn't like them. It was a good batch. But in the end, I do feel that it helped me understand more of it. And I continue to get some reward out of it. And where I said I didn't have total control while I was there, in fact, I remember exactly where I was. 9/11 happened. And
Uh,
I remember one of the faculty members coming in and saying, I just heard that a plane crashed into, to one of
oh
the
shit,
towers in New
really?
York. And he was freaking out because his wife was traveling that day.
Oh, God.
She was not involved. But then we heard like a second plane, and all of a sudden it's like, this is no accident. Like, so I won't get into that. I think we've talked a little bit about that. But what happened after that is enrollment for international studies programs skyrocketed
Oh,
because a lot of
yeah,
people wanted to understand a little bit more about what's going on internationally. And we became the most applied to School of International Affairs while I was there, which was, again, it wasn't that our numbers went up, they were going to go up, but we went
right.
up more than anyone else. And part of that was probably because we were in DC. But that sort of stuff I enjoyed and I decided to stick with it. And then I applied to be an associate registrar at University of North Carolina pretty much right after I moved down there. And that was a bit of a stretch for me, because I had only ever, I worked in the registrar's office, but I had never had a supervisory role in the registrar's office.
Did you
And
feel, it sounds to me like when you were started with the admissions work, that you found yourself to be kind of data driven, and had that kind of data driven approach to admissions there. Did that factor into why you were looking at a registrar position, or is it just something that came up that you saw on I can't think of there's a paper, whatever, the Chronicles of Higher Education, or whatever it is.
And I think there was another job site at the time that was specific for higher ed positions. It'll come to me too. But I think I had decided that I didn't want to stay in admissions. Like, that was clear to me. I was glad I did it. I remember talking to a former colleague who worked as a recruiter or something in undergrad admissions, and they were like, "Oh, this is my last day." I'm like, "Oh, you know, I thought you liked it over there." She's like, "I decided," she goes, I don't know if it's a myth. They're like, if you're in admissions for 3 years, you're in it for life. And she goes, and my 3-year anniversary is next week. She goes, I want out. So so that stuck with me, whether it was true or not. While I was at American, I applied for assistant dean of students or something like that. And I think I would have got the job. I talked to another colleague at the school, and she's like, you really have to know you're doing this. She goes, because once you leave the academic side and go over to the student affairs side, you're going to be there for the rest of your career. And I was like, and I hadn't thought about it that way. There's no reason for her to mislead me. She was part of the search committee. She's like, I will back you. She's like, but I just need, she goes, you don't seem like that's your side of things. So I withdrew my application, and everything kept drawing me back to the registrar's office. I had been in that role. Let me take one more step back. I did take a leave after my older son was born, and stayed home with him for 9 months because of daycare challenges. When I looked to go back to work, I heard from the registrar, who had not been the registrar when I left, but she had been in a lower level. We worked really well together. She called me and asked if I'd be willing to come back and work in the registrar's office. So I could work on special projects, whatever I wanted. It was part-time at first, and then it became full-time. So sorry, I forgot that piece. I had this return to the
so that piece
registrar's office.
that piece was still in DC.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was right before we moved to North Carolina. So when I was leaving, I was coming from a registrar's office. I had a lot of support. Yeah. Yep.
Cool.
So then I didn't think I'd get the position. I did, but I remember my future boss saying, I have to go through this process. She said, but I'm going to hire you. And she said, starting salary is $80,000, no negotiations. I'm like, okay, I'll think about it. And I left, and I was like, yes. I was like,
that's awesome. That's fantastic. All right. So at that point,
yep.
was there a point where you formally withdrew from a PhD program? Was there a point where it was official that you weren't working on your PhD?
There probably was, but it wasn't until I was well into my career at North Carolina. So
yeah, that was my recollection, was that you were still technically, because in terms of our combined history, you went, there was a 5-year period, I would say, when you left, when we all left St. Louis, that I didn't lose track of you. I think I geographically knew where you were at certain times, except for the fact that I never knew you came back to St. Louis, because you must have come back to St. Louis when I was in Columbia, Missouri, because I was only there for about 1.5 years.
Yeah, and I was only there for that summer.
Okay. Yeah, because I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware that you would come back at all. But of course, I wouldn't have been there either, because I was, it was my first job, and I was working through the summer and taking the bar and all that other kind of stuff. But you and I would say, didn't keep in touch very well for about that 5-year period. I knew you were in DC. I knew you were at American University. Before that, I knew you were at Rutgers, but I don't think we were communicating all that often. And I feel like that came back after you got your master's. You were studying for your PhD, but you were also basically right in the period of time when we just stopped at, which was that move to North Carolina. Because that's when I feel like we started, like that's when I think those traveling mixtapes started and that kind of stuff kind of came back.
Yeah, and I mentioned him. He's been one of my greatest advocates, and he actually called me and asked if I'd be interested in coming back to American as the registrar when they had an opening at one point. So Peter Kuznick studies American history. He's the founder of the Nuclear Institute at American University. So studying the culture around the bombings, the A bomb, and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I actually went to Japan with him one summer
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
to help conduct a class and all that stuff. While I was in North Carolina, so super quick because this matters. So I got the associate registrar job fairly quickly. I was asked to go over and work on a project to implement a new student information system, which was PeopleSoft. So I did that. I got a slight bump in salary for being on the project. That lasted for roughly 2 years. We implemented PeopleSoft, and thereabouts, my boss was fired, and they conducted a search. And I like to describe it as they tried really hard not to hire me. But I emerged as there was, I guess, some support for me. I emerged as the only candidate who would take the job, I guess. So I became the university registrar at UNC. Not sure I ever imagined I'd be a registrar, but it's an important step up in my career. And then I won't get into it. And I had a good run. And during a lot of that time, I continued to try to work on my research. Peter helped me get through. I had to pay to maintain my status as a student. So I paid for 1 credit hour for several semesters. And then at a point, he's like, just stop paying, do your work. You'll go on a leave of absence. And when you're ready to come back, you can
Oh,
re-enroll.
so
So
theoretically, you
yeah,
can still do
theoretically, I
that.
can go back whenever the hell I want. But a lot of stuff took off from there. I mean, I had a good run with the PeopleSoft, helping to establish new processes on campus for the new system. At some point, the academic scandal at
Yeah.
UNC happened, and I became center to that because I was tasked with researching a lot of this stuff for the various legal firms that came in and were involved with that. That helped with my reputation internally. Externally, I would argue some people thought that maybe I was the one who allowed this
Responsible.
stuff to happen, but it had happened before my time. The registrar's job at Duke opened up. I had never thought about leaving UNC, but I was like, oh, what the hell, I'll apply for it. I didn't get the job. A friend of mine did. And then a year or so later, the job I'm currently in opened up, and I got a call from Duke asking if I would apply for it.
Oh,
So I
nice.
did. So a lot of these jobs, I will say this, like I I bragged about some stuff, but if you work in higher ed, the bar is not very high. You just you have to be fairly intelligent, be able to understand the big picture and be willing to work. And I've been able to move up. Like, and I have no interest in moving beyond where I'm at now. Like, I would never want to be a provost or a higher level position. There's one, if I don't have my PhD, I'm not going to be. But two, I'm in an area where again I continue to be rewarded by the work that I'm doing, and I'm not really looking for anything more beyond that right now.
Well, that seems to be a very succinct, I think, summary of how and why you are where you are right now. I apologize to the listeners because we haven't gotten to the most important part of your life and your career, which is your podcasting career, which I think only means we've set us up for a part two of this interview somewhere down the line. But that's for another day. Is there anything about your career, academically or professionally or otherwise, that I didn't ask you about that you think I need to know?
No, for you did a pretty good job of asking, relevant questions.
Fuck you.
Only thing I wanted to say in conclusion, and I will joke about one thing. No one's ever described me talking as being succinct. So thank you for that. You had said earlier that I was the reason for the podcast, and I disagree with that. It's one of the things that I think both of us do is we're fairly generous, especially towards each other and giving each other credit. But you and I had joked about doing a podcast, I would argue, for months before we did this, but it was semi-serious. It was like, we should do this. And the whole idea of doing a podcast, I think, was intimidating to us. And then I happened to get an opportunity at Duke through a organization called Diversify IT to do a couple episodes of a podcast as a co-host. I was definitely the weak link on the show. But I remember you saying that, or at least expressing some jealousy for that. And then the fact that, yes, we did it in a professional studio at Duke, but seeing a little bit behind the scenes, I just felt that it was something that we could do. Whereas before it seemed just like sort of a crazy idea that we could never accomplish.
Right.
A lot of people probably hoped, wished we had never accomplished it, but we did. And we're in season 7. And I think it was born out of both of our ideas. And I think you started us down this path with saying we should do one at some point. The fact that I got introduced to what it might be like, I felt like we finally could do it. And then we just decided to jump in and figure it out. And here we are.
If you took a lead as a motivating factor, which I still stand by that statement, it was that we could do this better than they do. And I was like, I listened to the ones you were on, and you're right, I was a little bit jealous. And I thought, after you said that, I was like, yeah, you know what? I think we could do that. Now, whether we've proven that is a whole other question, but we certainly have. We've lasted longer than that podcast did, right?
We have. That one is, I think, now only in repeats. So
just in case listeners didn't know exactly how old we were.
Yeah.
We'll mention repeats.
Yeah.
Nobody under the age of 40 knows what a fucking repeat is. All right, so that is our interview of the famous podcaster Chris Derickson. So, but we do need to move on to a couple segments so that we don't get behind. The first of those segments is our recommendations for the year 2005. This is our 5th episode of the season. We are making recommendations from the aughts, and this episode is 2005. What would you like to recommend?
Now, I went with, since this was an episode about me, I went with just my favorite stuff. And Wedding Crashers came out in 2005. It's not as funny as Dodgeball, but it's pretty close. It has its moments. I feel like the ending is a little interesting, but Vince Vaughn is in prime form in this. Owen Wilson as well. Will Ferrell plays an unforgettable character, and I think Rachel McAdams is also awesome in this. I really like her as an actress. And
I did too.
Is it Isla Fisher? I don't know.
I think it's Isla, actually.
Isla, there you go.
I'm not sure.
Isla Fisher is hilarious in some of the most uncomfortable
awesome.
ways. She's great. So it's just a really fun movie. I mean, Christopher Walken's in it. The number of great actors just seems like they're having a lot of fun, and I've watched it multiple times. I love it. So that's mine, Wedding Crashers.
Awesome. My 2005 recommendation is an animated series that started in 2005. I could probably go on for an hour talking about the series and the comic strip that it's based on. It's called The Boondocks, and it was created by Aaron McGruder. It's basically, I won't spend a ton of time. Just find it, search it, watch The Boondocks. It's about these two brothers who are being raised by their grandfather, and they live in kind of an affluent white suburban neighborhood. And hilarity ensues. That's all I'll say. It's very socially conscious. It makes a lot of interesting comments about society back in the 2000s. It is well worth watching, and the comic strip itself it's bound. You can buy books that have all of the Boondock strips in them as well. I recommend it highly, but the animated series in particular is what I'm recommending because that started in 2005.
And I'm old and can't remember stuff, but if we haven't done an episode on just flat out comic strips versus comics, maybe we should, because I remember Boondocks and you turning me on to it when it was but when it was a strip in the paper. But it was, I think, as important to you as Calvin and Hobbes was. It was a
Yeah, and what's interesting is the animated series went further than the strip was able to go, and I think he really spread his wings with that. Magruder did, and it's phenomenal. It's really good. And by the way, we did do a comic strip episode probably 7 or 8 months ago, I think.
Damn, I suck.
See, you're right about your memory. I will say that. So, next segment is post facto.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
Post facto is where we try to correct mistakes and sometimes just add information we didn't have. In this case, it is a fairly large mistake, at least for the person involved. I said in our last episode that Pat Sajak was dead. He's not dead at all, apparently. Although I think the reason I thought he was dead is there was a hoax. There was like an internet hoax saying that he was dead, and that must have been what stuck in my mind. Congratulations, Pat, on not being dead.
I have two post factos. One I didn't plan on. The first is apparently we did do an episode on comic strips.
I'm glad you corrected that. Thank you.
The second one is I still haven't finished the Buffalo Hunter. So, and I don't even have an excuse. We had the
no,
last
you
time
do
I had
though.
to say this. Yeah, I can't talk about it. Last time was because we recorded 2 days later after I said I'd finish it. This has been a whole week. It's been a hell of a week, but
yeah, I was going to say, based on what you've told me, I think you get a pass on this time, but you better have it fucking read by next episode. That's
all right. I'll be ready.
All right. That takes us to staff picks.
Just around the corner from you.
Staff picks is our opportunity to make a recommendation, usually of something brand new or coming out, although it has morphed a little bit into something that's maybe more brand new for us and not necessarily brand new, period. I had a completely different musical staff pick that is a new song that I think I'm going to save for a future episode, because last night I watched an incredible movie I had not heard of that came out in 2023 called 1001. It was directed by a woman named A.V. Rockwell. It stars Teyana Taylor, who apparently is also a musical person, a singer, performer. I hadn't heard of her, but it's Teyana Taylor, William Catlett, and Hosea Cross. They're three actors I had never come across before. This movie is phenomenal. It is the story of a woman basically who gets out of jail, finds her boy who is in foster care and takes him, and then it creates just spends the rest of the movie trying to avoid the authorities and creating a life for her and her son. It is set in the early 90s, New York City, primarily in Harlem, I think. And so it's Giuliani's New York, and it is the most powerful film I've seen in quite a while. It is a 5-star. It's a 5 egg burritos with sour cream movie. It won a lot of Independent Spirit type awards and Sundance awards. Wasn't nominated for an Oscar, which I think is a travesty after having seen this film. I don't know why I didn't know about it beforehand, and I can't even really remember why it came across my radar recently. I watched it last night. Watch 1001, Chris. I think you'll love the movie. I recommend it to anybody. It is one of the most powerful things I've seen in a long time. It's really good. Nice
pivot. I've not heard of that movie either, but
yeah,
that's not overly surprising for me. I'm shocked that you haven't heard of it though.
Out of the blue, and just so unfortunate it didn't get more interest and press in like the mainstream, film world. I don't know what else to say.
Mine's not nearly as powerful, but I'm also surprised. I'm equally surprised that I've never heard of this band. So the band is Ghost Hounds. It's a rock band, bluesy influence, country influence. The lead singer, I don't even know how to pronounce his name. It's S-A-V-N. It's S-A-V-N-T, all capitals. So Savant.
Savant? I don't know. Yeah.
Savant.
Maybe.
Save Net.
I'm not so sure about that one, but okay.
They just came out with a new album called Almost Home. I've listened to it once through and listened to a couple songs more than that. But what's cool is it's a concept album in essence. It's a story arc of the start of a relationship all the way through to some rougher times And then they end on what is a great song. Sorry, it's a Patty Griffin song, and she joins them in singing it. The Long Ride Home, which is the Hearst bringing, the end of life. So
Wow.
runs the whole story arc, still getting into them, but this album just came out. It's a large group. It's like 6 people, but I like what I'm listening to right now, and I encourage folks to check it out. It's I'm a little surprised I've never heard of it. This is their 5th or 6th album. So
Oh, wow. Yeah, when you put it on the outline yesterday on my way home from work, I listened to the first song, which I didn't love,
Yeah.
but I also didn't realize that it was a concept album. It sounds like it is one you got to listen to
Yeah.
of a piece, I guess. So I'm going to try to do that this weekend and report back because I had not heard of them either. And finally, as far as segments are concerned, we have the most important. We have our playlist picks. So every episode, we each pick a song for our running playlist. This season, season 7, has 8 songs on it so far. This will make 9 and 10. We generally try to connect this to a theme. There's not much of a theme here other than Chris, exclamation point. Or D. I like D, exclamation point. In fact, I think that's gonna be the title of the episode. I just
It's
thought
about D.
it's D. So my playlist song is tough. I had it down to 2. They're 2 completely different songs. And I think I'm gonna go nostalgia as opposed to just one of my favorite songs that you've recommended in the past. But I'm going with Slide It In from the album Slide It In from 1984 by Whitesnake. If there's a song that when I hear it, I think of you, that's it. That's the song we would listen to probably 2 or 3 times in a couple hours as we pre-partied in the fraternity house before we hit the row while we were playing War for Beer. And I swear to God, when that song comes on, which isn't that often these days, but when I hear it, if I close my eyes, I'm 19 years old, sitting in a shitty fraternity house room, drinking shitty draft beer from a pitcher. So that's going to be the next song from me on the playlist for season 7.
I could have gone with any number of songs. I appreciate the callback to Whitesnake, but I went with a more recent one by a band called Bombadil. They're from Durham, North Carolina, but the song Born at 5 is just one of my all-time favorites. It's a story song about a guy born at 5 o'clock, traces quickly through his life very nicely. I like the tying in of some of the great themes, like kissed a girl at 13, but she didn't kiss back when he's older. And I think reflecting back on somewhat of an unfulfilled life, he's lying on a beach dreaming that the girl kisses back. So just some really cool story parts, and it's just it's very emblematic of this band, although I've not gotten into some of their other stuff as much. But I did read in preparing for this, the lead singer rejoined the band, so maybe I'll give him another look. So Born at 5 by Bombadil.
Cool. Both of those songs will be on our running playlist for season 7. You can find the playlist on Spotify, on Apple Music, on YouTube Music, and Amazon Music. Please listen to them, share them, download them, and let us know what you think.
Third Song In is recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Joliet, Illinois.
You can email us at thirdsongin@gmail.com. Please let us know what you think of this episode, any of our episodes. We'd also ask you to follow us, rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Again, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube Music. Review us if you can. Please give us all your goddamn stars.
We also have a website, thirdsonginpodcast.com. You can find all of the recommendations, the staff picks, direct links to the playlist through YouTube.
We have a blog that is available from our website, but also on Substack, and you can subscribe to our blog, which comes out on a weekly basis at either of those places, and we would ask that you do so.
You've been listening to Third Song In, Chris Derickson, Tom Polacek. Thanks for listening. Here, let me turn this off. I'm going to stop recording.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to say anything funny.
I don't think you will either.